Hi everyone, welcome to MetalNet TV. My name is Sara, and today I have the Living Dead drummer Nicholas Mason with me. I'm really excited to be talking to Nicholas because he is a session musician and a touring musician, and I want to ask him all kinds of things about his career and what he's up to these days. So definitely stay tuned for that. But before we start, I just want to remind you to subscribe to this channel, to click the notification bell, and also to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Here we go. Hey Nicholas, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. I'm excited for it.
Yay. So I'll just start by saying that I know that I've been wanting to connect with you for several months now, and it's been really
Yeah.
difficult because you are literally on tour all the time with I don't even know how many bands. How's the touring been going?
Good. It's been really good. Yeah. This year especially has the calendar's been full, and I kind of anticipated it too once things sort of opened back up and bands were able to go out in full force on the road again.
Hmm.
It seemed like every band
Hmm.
was all like, "Let's go on tour!" Like every band all at once, and so. The first half of this year, I was juggling two different tours at the same time where I was playing a show one night and then being flown out to play a show with a different band and then flying back to go rejoin the first band again. They would like take a day off so I could go fly somewhere else. Um, and then the rest of the year was all with the same band. So I was with
Okay.
Pretty Boy Floyd for most of this year.
Hmm.
Um, and then, yeah, early in the year, I was juggling Pretty Boy Floyd with FleischKrieg.
Hmm.
So, which now, uh, Pretty Boy Floyd's on break, and for the remainder of the year, it's all FleischKrieg.
Oh, okay.
So, with a
So does
couple
that
little
mean you get a
things
few
sprinkled in and out.
does that mean you get a few days off, like actual days off now?
Yeah, November is just weekend fly dates, so we're doing two
Mhm.
shows a week in November. So I'll like leave on a Thursday or Friday, fly out somewhere, go play two shows, and then fly back Monday kind of deal or
Okay.
Sunday. So it's like that all through November. And December right now is off.
Oh,
So
very
December I'll
nice.
actually be able to be at home for a whole month, which is
That's nice.
unusual. Well, I say that now, but it could change tomorrow. So
Yeah, I was keeping my eye on your calendar, so I felt like it just filled up, like you would just blink, and then all of a sudden there's a slew of dates there. Is this normal for you? Because we're going to talk about how you are a touring musician and a session
Mhm.
musician. Is it normal for you, let's say 3 years back or 4 years back, to have that much touring or on your schedule, or is it usually more of a balance between the two?
um, I always would tour a lot, but it would be broken up more.
Hmm.
It wouldn't be like continual through the whole year with one group. It would be, okay, I'll go out and do some dates with this band, and then they're done for
Hmm.
months. And then
Right.
I'll go out, and during that time, I'll go out and do some dates with another band. And so usually I would have more of a variety,
Okay.
and I'd be playing with sometimes 9 to 10 different bands in one year.
Okay.
Um, and then that's mixed in with doing session work, and even that's picked up in the last couple of years too. Whereas prior to 2020, all of my recording session stuff, I would do a handful during the course of the year. I would do maybe 2 or 3 records in one year with 2 or 3 different bands. Um, but that has once we got into 2020 and things were closed for a while, everyone also decided, hey, it's time to finally write that new song or that
Right.
put that new record out or whatever it is. And so I have my own studio in Los Angeles that's set up for recording, so I don't have to go anywhere, and that was convenient for people too. Most recording studios were closed for a while.
Right.
They still wanted to get their music done, so I could do everything remotely through email, and that became just a convenience factor for people. Once kind of word got out that, oh, Nick can do that and I just email him the files, and he'll send me the drums back, and they'll sound just as good as if we went to the studio down the street. Um, Once that got out, that's just been a steady flow, like steady income flow the whole time. I think I did 30 different projects just recording in 2020 alone. It went
Wow.
from like 3 or 4 a year to
Right.
30 a year. And that's never slowed up. Now people are just paying attention to my calendar more with the touring. They're going, okay, when are you home? They're
Right.
trying to like hit, it's like trying to hit a moving target. And I just, on this last Pretty Boy Floyd tour, I had somebody in Florida that was like, I got a bunch of songs I'm going to send you, kind of thing. I saw you're off at the end of October. And I was like, well, sort of. I'm home for like a week, and yeah, and I got, a whole album's worth of material in my inbox the other day. And I was like, oh, well, I guess I got something to do during the week now.
And is this something, did you do the at-home recording at all before 2020, or did you always just go to a studio and record
Yeah, I would always
traditionally?
go to a studio. I had the ability to do it.
Hmm.
I just never did. There was a few pieces of equipment that I needed to invest in still that I just kind of was procrastinating with, because I didn't feel like there was a big demand for it. Most people would say, hey, we're going to record and this is the studio we're going to go to. Okay, I'll just pack up the drums and meet you at that studio. Um, so I never really pursued it much. I did a little bit of it in my own home before I moved to California when I lived on the East Coast.
Hmm.
But again, it was kind of rare. Most people liked the atmosphere of going to a recording studio. And I get that. I like it too. Um, but it really, like, when I had time at home and, all the tours and gigs were getting canceled kind of all at once, um, I kind of said, well, what am I waiting for? Like, I need this and this, but everything else I kind of already own. I already own all the microphones and cabling and stuff. And I said, well, why don't I just invest in those couple things and start playing around with it? And I did. And within a couple of weeks, I started just doing demos for friends just to be like, am I crazy? Or is this sound good? Like, does it
Right.
sound okay? And then um, I sent some raw drum tracks to a couple of high-ranking producer friends of mine, um, and I was the same thing. Like, am I crazy, or is this like just okay? And they all kind of came back and said, no, it sounds great. It's like your tracks sound fine. Um, so then I just started spreading the word amongst musician friends and stuff like that, and said, hey, if you're working on anything new and you need drums,
Right.
I can do it without having to leave the house. And, one by one, people started doing that. And then it sort of spread from there to now it's just like an understood and known thing that, like, oh, if you want Nick to record on your thing, just email him.
Did this open you up also to, let's say, up and coming musicians who maybe don't have the funding to pay for a big studio and record their album there? Do you find that there's
Yeah,
more people coming to you saying, I want to do this, and you're a great drummer, so
for sure.
yeah.
It absolutely does, because in addition to paying your musicians that you're hiring to play on your project, you also are paying hourly at whatever studio.
Right.
And so now you're taking that added cost out of it, where it's now you just have to pay your musicians and you don't have to pay the studio because you're getting it direct. So yeah, definitely more independent artists and up and coming artists and stuff like that. I've been doing a lot of work for them, and it's for that reason. It's a little bit easier on the bank account if they're not paying, $40 or $50 an hour at a recording studio on top of having to pay me and their bass player and whoever else they're hiring to do their thing.
Right.
Um, so yeah, there's lots and lots of independent musicians and stuff, and it's cool because then you get exposed to new music. Like, I'm not the kind of person who listens to the radio in the car because they're just playing the same stuff. Like I can't tell you how many times I flip through the stations and I have to turn off the same Guns N' Roses song on 3 different radio stations, and it's a 35-year-old song, and I'm just like, I've heard it, you know, I get it, I know the song, I don't want to listen to it right now. So there's not, a lot of avenues for being exposed to new music unless you're just like spinning a roulette wheel on Spotify or something. So this way I get to hear the music direct that people are writing and making right now.
Maybe. Do you find that there are unrealistic expectations that people come to you and they expect you to kind of be all knowing and be able to do things like kind of like that? Or do you find that people understand that you're going to maybe need a minute to prep what they ask for?
It's a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in every situation imaginable. Sometimes people are understanding of it, and they're like, yeah, take your time, figure it out, do what you got to do. And then sometimes other people, they will have an idea in their head that maybe isn't very realistic,
Mm-hmm.
but because they thought of it, they think that it is achievable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there is a record I did years ago, and as far as I know, it still hasn't been released. And I did hear from the people I did it for a couple of months ago, and they said it's finally done.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, like I recorded drums on this thing like 4 or 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that exact kind of conversation came up one time where like I needed a minute with a they threw a new song at me right there in the studio. It wasn't one that we had done in pre-production. It wasn't one that I had gone and I'd cut demos with the band on every song on the record before we went into the studio to record them. So I kind of knew the lay, I knew the arrangements and stuff like that ahead of time. And then they threw a brand new one at me while we were there, like, oh, we got some extra time, let's do this one too. Okay, great. Let me listen to it. Let me figure out some parts. And it was really awkward and difficult what they were asking for. It was like physically awkward to try to perform. And I was trying to work on it and stuff like that. And I had to explain the keyboard player, I had to explain to him, like, this, what you're trying to do here doesn't fit, and it's very awkward, and it, you know, and you want this and this at the same time, which isn't really physically possible.
Mm-hmm.
You run into that a lot with people that program drums where they're not thinking in terms
Right.
of physicality. They're not thinking in terms of a human has 4 limbs. They're thinking in terms of this sounds cool and that sounds cool. And as a result, you get something that you might need 3 legs or 3 arms to actually achieve. And then I was trying to explain that to the guy, and he goes, well, I know it's possible because I programmed it. And the whole control room like fell silent.
Yeah.
They thought I was going to kill him.
I'm surprised you didn't.
Yeah. So, there is some unrealistic expectations sometimes. And I've had conversations with bands too where they have all programmed drums on their recording, and I'm going to go play live with them.
Right.
This happens more often than any other scenarios because now programming parts is so commonplace in music, especially in industrial music, which I do a lot of.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just get the finished product song, and they say, okay, learn the drum parts, and then we're going to go out on the road. Well, again, they're not thinking in terms of physicality, and I had to call up a band one time and sit with them on the phone. I said, okay, in this song you have X, Y, and Z happening. You can have 2 of those. You can't have all 3 at the same time because I was only born with 2 arms. So pick what you want and I'll do that.
Oh, that's really funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I interviewed somebody else, Joe Franco, who had played with Twisted Sister, and it's just pretty legendary in his own right.
Yeah,
And he was talking about that.
I use one of his drum method books with my students actually.
Was it double bass drumming?
Yeah.
Yeah. Celebrating a milestone anniversary, I think this month. But yeah, he was talking about that he had started doing some programming, but he programs like a drummer. Like
Yes.
he will program what a drummer can actually play, even though he knows that, there's plenty of
Because
people
he's
who
a
don't.
drummer, so he
Yes.
can get away with that. I know a lot of other drummers, they'll do the same thing, but then there's other music producers that are not the drummer, and they program like a composer would,
Right. Right.
versus what the role of drumming actually is.
Mhm.
Um, and it's changing very, very, very rapidly in the industry now. And a lot of the things that I was taught growing up, and what most drummers are taught growing up, of like, playing in the pocket and don't step on the vocals, and you're a supportive role to move the song from A to B. A lot of that with newer music and the younger generations now is not the case.
Mhm.
And because of the situations I've been put in over the last, so many years, with my own students that I'm teaching, I've had to kind of shift from that, you're a supportive role for the song, at all times, to, well, they want you to kind of play like a machine now. It's, you should still develop feel and groove and all that stuff, but timing above all else is, you have to be able to play to a click, and you have to be able to be on beat the whole time, no matter what you're playing. And um, and I really, really stress the importance of timekeeping and things like that, and make sure that all of my students can play to a metronome, you know, uh, and really, really, really work on that hard with all of them, because the minute they get out into the real world and start joining bands and stuff like that, that's exactly what people are going to be asking them. Is, the first two questions I'm asked by anybody when they hire me is, can you play to a click, and can you sing backup?
Mhm.
And if I say no to either one of those things, my chances of actually getting a job are drastically reduced.
Mhm.
Um, Even if I don't sing backup in the band, they always like to know that that's a tool in the back pocket if they want it or
Possibility.
need it.
Yeah.
And playing to the click thing is almost mandatory. You can't get any jobs unless you play to a click. And if someone tells you they don't want you to do that, it's usually because they can't keep time. you know I've been in that situation before too, where they're like, oh, we find the click too restricting. I'm like, no, you just can't count to four properly.
So earlier in your career, did you find that the click wasn't necessary for gigs, and now it's like,
I think that
or
I
is
don't
it
want to say it
does it
wasn't
depend on the style
necessary.
of the music too? Does it?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're not going to get people playing to a metronome with jazz or anything like that, but in the world of rock music, it's very, very mandatory. And that was a big thing I noticed, as a taking a leap from going from the minor leagues to the pros kind of
Okay.
thing, where like, um when I grow I grew up on the East Coast in New York State, and it wasn't, drummers playing to a click track, sure, in the studio,
Mhm.
I would do it, but live with most bands, it wasn't commonplace.
Mhm.
Um, and then when I moved to California and started playing with musicians here in LA, it was just, that's just what you do. It was just understood that everyone does that.
Gotcha.
And I think now it's much more common uh, everywhere, but at the time it wasn't commonplace to play live to a click track until I moved to California, and everybody here was doing that.
Okay.
Um, and so I think in smaller markets where maybe it's I, I don't want to say not a professional scene, because there's definitely professional musicians in every city, but like, um, where you go to a smaller town where it's local bands playing the bars on Friday night kind of thing, I think you'd run into that a little bit less
Mhm.
than, the club scene in a bigger city,
Mhm.
you know. Um, and I'm kind of just guessing at that. Like I said, I've run into a lot of people all over the country now that are playing to a click track, and they're just in their local band at home kind of thing. I think it's become more common in recent years. So
So
yeah.
you mentioned that you grew up on the East Coast in New York. So I wanted to go back
Mhm.
and talk about growing up and your family. And
Sure.
so where did you grow up? You said, was it Western New York?
Yeah, Buffalo. Yep.
Buffalo. Very cool. Very
Hmm.
cool. And I learned that your family is extremely musical and that
Yes.
your mom's side, let's start with your mom's side,
Hmm.
like everybody is a drummer.
Yeah.
Like your mom's a drummer. I think your grandpa, your uncles,
Yep.
your cousins. So I
Yeah.
think we joked that if they're not a drummer, they're married to a drummer.
Or
So
their kid's a drummer, or no, that's exactly what it is. My mom's side of the family, I don't know what it was. It was just everybody played the drums. So I think it started kind of with my grandfather.
Mhm.
He played, he was in like a big band um, uh, back in the 50s, and my grandmother would tell us stories about how she would go and watch him play in a swing band kind of thing when they were first dating.
Mhm.
Um, and so he was a drummer, and he didn't keep up with it later in life until much later in life, and then he started kind of tinkering around a little bit again with it, sort of thing. But it was always understood in the family that he was a drummer. And so his, two oldest kids, my mom and my uncle, they started playing drums in school when they were kids. And my uncle kept up with it. They were both in like the school band and stuff like that. My uncle ended up playing in like a rock band in the early 80s and stuff like that. And life happens. They kind of set the sticks aside to have families and stuff like that for a little while, but now they both got back into it too. My uncle,
Oh,
he's almost got a busier schedule than I do right now, where he plays in like 5 or 6 different bands back home in Buffalo, like just doing like top 40 covers, or he's got a 90s cover band and an 80s cover band, and right. And his calendar is so full. He's playing like 4 or 5 nights a week all
wow.
year long.
Yeah.
His house now looks like a drum shop. It like last time I went over there, it was like 3 full drum sets set up just in the family room, and then down in the basement, there's like 6 other kits down there, and like the garage has 4 drum sets in it. It's just become like this hoarder of drums. Um, he's in Nashville right now. Um, on vacation, and like all the photos that he's putting on Facebook are just all of his Forks drum closet, and it's the it's all the drum shops, that he's like doing a tour of all the music stores in Nashville.
That's
But
awesome.
and so having the generational thing move down, I just kind of bled into everywhere else. I had a cousin, have a cousin, Michael, who he lives in Vegas, but he was the professional drummer in the family.
Okay.
um, when I was a kid, he was touring with Jermaine Stewart in the 80s.
Okay.
And when I first started an interest and had started playing drums too, um, I did it because I had always, always, always had a bucket of drumsticks at my house that had been accumulated from friends of my mom or whoever. And my uncle gave me a snare drum when I was like 2 years old.
Okay.
So I always had a drum, and I always had drumsticks no matter what. And you know, when I kind of took an interest into like maybe I want to learn how to play an instrument, um, and I got a drum set. My cousin he came over and helped me set up the drums and show me how to set them up and stuff like that, and taught me a few things. And then at the time he was living out here in California, and so then I started playing, and then one by one all my cousins started playing too. Again, because my uncle had a drum set in the basement, at all times. So of course, a couple of his kids, my cousins, decided to have an interest in it because they had a drum set at home already.
Great.
And then, and it just kept going from there. And then ironically, a bunch of my cousins who didn't play the drums, like their wives and husbands, and were drummers. And
Yeah.
it was really bizarre, and but it was cool. It was a lot of fun.
Well, I think a lot of people like, yeah, I always ask people like, why'd you choose your instrument and that? And a lot of people do say, I wanted to be a drummer, but like couldn't get their hands on a kit basically because
Yeah.
it takes a lot of space or mom and dad aren't like keen on the idea. So it's really cool that like you just had it just there around, and you are not banging on pots and pans because you didn't have to. Like you had
Right.
an actual snare drum. How old were you when you got your first kit?
I was probably a little bit older than, yeah, I started playing when I was 10, but I was doing like orchestra. I was in the school orchestra. So I was playing, just snare drum and bass drum and, xylophone and all percussion stuff. I kind of switched to drum set. I think I was somewhere between eighth grade and high school.
Okay.
Um, so I think like right when I was getting out of eighth grade, I was like, I want to play drum set. I want to play rock music.
Yeah.
I don't want to play the orchestra stuff anymore. So I got a drum set then. Um, so I don't know what age is that, like 13?
13-ish.
Yeah,
Seems like about
yeah.
that.
So I got a drum set then, and then the stipulation was, if you get a drum set, you got to learn how to actually use it. So I got signed up for drum lessons right away.
So it wasn't like your mom or your uncle or your grandfather that gave you lessons. You went to like a place
Yeah, yeah,
or
most people in the family like didn't feel comfortable teaching their own kind of
right.
thing because, and I get that too. Like if I had kids, I wouldn't want to be the one to teach them. I'd show them a couple things, but like, no, you go to a teacher and like, you know, um, so no, it was my cousin who had come over and helped set up the drums and stuff. He told my mom who to call. It's like, call this place and they'll recommend somebody. So we called the drum shop actually where I got the drums from, and they recommended a teacher, and I signed up with him, and I took lessons from him for 13 straight years.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you
Yeah,
took to the lessons. Like you didn't,
yeah.
because some people have that thing where they're like, the lessons just didn't do it for me. I had to just go home and completely,
Right. I'm a
whatever.
big advocate for music education. And
Mhm.
I very strongly believe that if you want something done right, you need to learn how to do it correctly, you need to train for it, and you need the proper education from well-educated people. And that was a problem I had when I was doing the school band thing when I was younger, is um, in a small elementary school, you have like one music teacher, and they got their degree as a general music educator. So they probably specialized in one specific instrument, but they learned a little bit on everything else enough to kind of teach a class.
Right.
I didn't really connect with that very well. We switched band directors like after my first year in the school band. I won an award and it was great and I had a good time and I had a great teacher that I liked, and then that teacher left and we got a new band director for the following couple of years, and like I just didn't connect with the guy, and it was very obvious that his instrument was piano, and
Mhm.
like he knew a little bit about drums but not enough because I was pointing out things in the sheet music that he had missed. I'm like, no, this is supposed to go like that. And I'm like 11, you know?
And he must have loved
So, yeah,
that.
well, I did run into him many years later, and he kind of admitted, he's like, oh, you probably knew more than I did. And I was like, yeah. Um, uh, so when I started taking private drum lessons, um, the guy I took lessons from, he was also like a high school band director, but he had a degree in percussion, like specifically. So I was like, well, if I'm going to learn from somebody, I'm going to learn from a drummer, not a piano player that knows a little bit about drums. I want to learn from a drummer who, this is your first instrument, this is what you grew up playing, this is what you went to school for. That's what I want to learn from. So, and I just clicked with the guy, and I still talk to him to this day. And like, and I stuck with him right up until the last drum lesson I took with him was like the week I moved to
Oh, okay.
LA.
All right.
Yeah, so he taught me all through high school, all through college, and all through, my adult years until I moved here, because I moved to LA when I was like 25 or 26, and like
Mhm.
he taught me right up until my mid 20s. Um, because I just felt like if you have a good teacher, you can never learn everything. There's always going to be something that you need to learn or work on, and I like having someone to motivate me and kind of like kick my butt a little bit, and of like, okay, you're slacking in this department, so you need to focus on that. You know, um, I uh, I'm pretty good about that on my own nowadays, of like identifying holes in my playing, going, I really need to work on this sort of thing. Um, but having someone uh, uh, kind of help with that discipline, especially growing up, when you're in high school or whatever, really, really helped and motivated me. And, he was a relentless teacher too. Like, oh my God, like I used to go to a music store uh, where he would teach lessons out of the back of, but eventually he decided he wanted to start his own music school. And there was like a building for sale directly across the street from my house. And he bought it. And that was like a blessing and a curse, because now I just had to walk across the street for my drum lessons. But if I was 1 minute late, he would walk across the street and like knock on my bedroom
Oh
window.
man.
Like, I can't tell you how many times like my lessons were like 8 in the morning on Saturdays, and I'd accidentally oversleep or like something like that, and we woken up by him knocking on my
Oh
bedroom
my
window, being like, "Come
goodness.
on, Nick, let's go." Or like one time, I think I was in college and I came home really late from a out of town gig. Like I had just driven 3 hours in the middle of the night. I pulled into my driveway at like 5 after 8, and he was standing in my driveway. And he's like, "We got a drum lesson right now." And I was like, I I haven't slept. I just got home. I played a show out of town. I drove all the way back here tonight. He's like, "Oh, you just came from a gig?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, you already got sticks on you then. Let's go."
So do you think he would have been like that with everybody if they had all lived across the street, or do you feel like you were
Yes, I
kind of like,
do.
oh really? That's
Yeah.
hilarious.
Yeah.
I
But
thought
I
maybe he was
really
a little bit more invested in you since you were like, clearly disciplined.
maybe, but I think he was kind of like that with everybody, and
That's
that's a quality that I really appreciated, and I've adapted it with my own students and stuff like that as well too, where like I'm kind of known as like the hard ass teacher,
yeah.
um, and that doesn't mean I don't make it fun for my students, because you got to have fun playing an instrument. That's the whole reason people pick it up in the first place, is to have fun. But I do hold their feet to the coals, and make sure that there's a certain amount of responsibility put on them for their own education and music kind of thing, you know?
Are you
So,
with your students, are you the teacher? I'm kind of guessing based on what you just
mhm.
shared that you want them to have like the discipline and know all the things that like every drummer should probably know.
Yeah,
But are you also the kind of teacher that if you had a student who's like, hey Nick, I just want to have fun. Like I have no intention of becoming like a professional drummer. Are you the teacher that's like, okay, cool, let's just work on songs? Or would you just be like, no,
no,
really, you have to know all of it?
no. They have to know all of it. If
Yeah.
you're going to be one of my, it doesn't matter if you want to just have fun or not. It's like having fun is fine, but you have to know the fundamentals. You have to know music theory. You have to be able to read drum music. You have to know your rudiments, and not just, I learned this thing once 3 years ago. No, you have to practice it regularly. Um, I I'm very insistent on all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And even if you are doing it just for fun, that's great. But I still want you to understand and comprehend what it is you're doing as you do it. Um, I'm not that teacher. I'm not a babysitter.
Mhm.
And if that's what you're looking for, I don't come to me. So,
I got you.
you know what I mean? That's not how I operate. That's not how you're gonna learn the right way, and that's the only thing. That's the only thing about it, is that you're gonna learn the right way. Not to say I won't work on songs. If I have a student that wants to learn a particular song, we'll definitely break it down and we'll learn it, but I will make them learn the music. I will make them learn all of the subdivisions that they have to know in order to play this one groove that's in the verse or whatever it is. Like, I will make sure that they understand the song, not just regurgitate it,
Right, right.
you know? So, I think it helps with being able to play it.
Mhm.
If you know what the kick pattern is, and you know what notes it is you're playing, and you know the subdivision of those notes that you're playing, I think you'll be able to execute it better and more proficiently than if you were just guessing and trying to match what you heard. Like if you actually sit there and go, okay, this snare drum falls on this beat in that measure. And if it was something especially that you were struggling with trying to nail this one off snare drum hit or something like that, if you know exactly where it is, then you can stop, break it down, count it out, and you'll nail it, you know, as opposed to just spending hours and hours trying to like force it through a muscle group that, you know, you haven't worked out or something. So the other
How,
thing too is, yeah, technique. Like technique is, I'm super strict about technique. Very, very strict on that kind of thing too.
when did you start teaching? How many years have you been teaching?
I've been teaching for 21 years.
Oh, okay, so quite a while.
Yeah.
So, did you start teaching while you were still studying with your teacher?
Oh yeah, he's the one that
Oh, okay.
encouraged me to do it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Um, I started teaching when I was 18.
Oh, wow. Oh,
Um,
so you started really young.
yeah, I
Yeah.
started teaching when I was 18. Um, I like was just graduating high school,
Mhm.
and um, I I thought it'd be fun to work in a music store,
Mhm.
you know, and just being around guitars and drums and stuff all day. I thought that'd be cool. And
Well, I just to
yeah,
jump in a minute, I heard that your dad owned a music store and that you actually worked there on Saturdays. Is that correct?
not
Younger?
exactly, sort
Okay.
of, not exactly. He didn't own a music store. He owned a guitar repair business,
A good, okay.
and
Okay.
it was when I was a kid, it was attached to a music store.
Okay.
So it was like a separate business that was attached to it. And I would go to work with him on Saturdays and stuff like that when I was a kid and, you know, sit at the bench while he would be fixing guitars all day. He still owns that business.
Mhm.
It's no, that music store is no longer in existence. And he moved the business into his own home. So he basically built a guitar shop in his basement.
Oh, wow.
Um, And so he'll have customers drop off and pick up kind of thing once a week, and the rest of the week he's down there, you know, elbows deep in someone's guitar. Um, he taught me a lot about how to do all that stuff, which started around the same time when I was like 18. So it all kind of ties together there, where
Mhm. It would make
I
you
had
very useful in a music store because you know some guitar stuff and you know your drum
well,
stuff.
and that's kind of how it came about too. Is I I was working a part-time job at like an office supply store where a bunch of my friends in high school, that was our high school job, right?
Okay.
And um, and then once I graduated high school, I was like, I'm going into college, and I'm like, all right, I'm ready to not know useless information about pens and the weight of different types of paper anymore. So I thought it'd be cool to get a music store job. So I just started poking around local music stores and just seeing if anybody was hiring, needing help. And one store was like, well, we don't need anybody behind the counter, but we do need a drum teacher. And
Mm.
I was like, no. I didn't feel confident in myself that I knew enough to actually teach somebody else how to do it. You know, I was playing in a local, you know, rock band kind of thing, and we had been playing around town for a few years, and while I had that going on, I didn't feel like teaching was. I just didn't think I was good enough.
Mhm.
And I told my drum teacher about it, and he was like, "No, you should do it. Like, you know what you're doing. You should definitely start teaching." "Oh, okay, well, so I was on my way to school one day, and I drove by a music store I'd never seen before, and it was on my way to class. And so on the way home, I stopped in and I kind of same thing, like, you guys looking to hire or anything else? And I kind of got hit with the same thing of like, well, we need a drum teacher. So I said, okay, and I took the job. And I worked on the floor at that music store, and they were cool because it was a little mom and pop shop. It was not very big. They sold everything, band instruments, uh, pianos, guitar, drums, you know, French horns, everything. It was awesome. Um, it was run by a nice elderly woman. Her and her husband, before he passed, they used to run it together, and their kids worked in the store, you know, fixing band instruments and teaching guitar lessons. It was great. And so I started teaching drums there, and it kind of started to pick up. So I'd be working on the floor selling guitars and stuff like that, and then start teaching a couple lessons here and there, and then my teaching schedule grew to a point where I was now mostly doing that, where I was teaching like 3 days a week the entire time the store was open. And then the same thing with the guitar repair stuff kind of trickled in too. So the owner's son was doing all the guitar repair. But he also, had a wife and kids, and was playing out in bands and stuff like that as well around town. And he had a very busy schedule as a local musician. And so there were certain like easy guitar repair jobs that could be done in a day or two, and he didn't really have the available time to just knock those out real quick. So I called my dad and was like, hey, walk me through how to do this. And I'd sit there, at a workbench with my dad on the phone, and he's like telling me how to adjust everything and stuff out. So then he kind of started educating me with guitar repair stuff. So then all of a sudden I'm teaching guitar lessons and doing all the repairs in the store. Or I mean, teaching drum
Drum
lessons
lessons,
and
yeah.
doing all the guitar repair in the store.
Wow.
And then I worked in that store for maybe about 4 years, but in that time, so it was like all during college I was
College,
there.
yeah.
And in that time, my teaching practice just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and to a point where I was teaching at 3 different locations, 4 days a week, twice on Saturdays, or maybe it
You
was
must have had a
5 days a
slew of
week. But
students.
yeah, so I had a huge teaching practice back in Buffalo, where the store where I was working on the floor, I was teaching there like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday mornings. And then Saturday afternoons, I would actually go to a different music store that was closer to my house and teach drum lessons there. And then Sundays, I was going to the music school that my drum teacher owned, and I was teaching lessons there. And so I was teaching a lot, and that became my full-time job, was teaching drum lessons. And uh, I had a very big teaching practice, again, right up until I moved to California. I still keep in touch with a few of my students too. Uh, and then when I moved here, I just kind of transferred that. I was like, well, I've been teaching drums for, you know, 6 or 7 years at this point, or however, maybe longer than that, 10 years or something. And so I was like, well, I know I got that skill and I can do that, and I like doing it. So then I started teaching when I got to LA, and same thing happened. Is like it just blew up and blew up, and at one point, up until the last 2 years, I had like 40 students a week,
Wow.
which is a lot.
It is a
And
lot. Just
and
even
I
remembering where everybody is,
yeah,
it's got to be a
and I
lot of
just
work.
and just with the amount of touring I've been doing the last like 2 years, I've had to cut it back significantly. Um, just and I hate doing that. I hate having to tell a student that's maybe been studying with me for a couple of years and been like, you're gonna have to go to somebody else now just because I don't have time, like I don't like having to do that, but I have had to, just because I can't teach weekends anymore, and that's like prime
Hmm.
real estate for a teacher, because if you're teaching, anyone high school age and earlier, like during the week it's harder for them because they're in school. So weekends is when they're going to want to do that, and like I'm never home on a weekend.
Right.
If I'm doing fly dates, it's like, well, we're flying out Thursday and we're coming home Monday, and that takes up your weekend.
Be very unusual, I think, for you to have a Saturday or a Sunday off, or
Yeah,
Friday night even. Yeah.
exactly. So right now I'm only teaching like Monday through Thursday kind of thing, just during the week in the afternoons kind of deal. So I've had to put strict parameters on my schedule.
Yeah. What did you major in college? Did you pursue music there too, or did you do something different?
I actually did something different. I did graphic design.
Oh, cool. Well, that's very
I
useful
it
to
it
what you're
is.
doing now.
It is. I went for graphic design. I did take music courses while I was in college as well. So I did study some music there. Especially working in that music store at the time, I wanted to be able to know something with every instrument so I could sell it better.
Mhm.
Like, it's a little hard to sell a trumpet to somebody if I don't know how a trumpet works.
Mhm.
So when I was in school, I made it a point to like take music theory classes and stuff like that. And then also working in that store, I took lessons for a brief period of time on every single instrument that we offered lessons for. So I took some violin lessons, I took some piano lessons, vocal lessons, guitar, bass, um, woodwinds, all that stuff, just so that way I could go on the floor. And when someone wanted to buy a violin, I could show them the right technique, and I could say, okay, this one's too small for you. You need something like this, blah, blah, blah. No, hold the bow like that,
Right.
made me a better salesman.
That's awesome.
And also, now I can know a little bit on every instrument. I wouldn't dare teach any of these other instruments because I don't want to fall into the same trap that I was in when I was a kid with having a general education music teacher trying to teach lessons on all these things. I wouldn't do that, but I can at least like point and guide. So in college, well, when I was in high school, I started splitting my last 2 years of high school with a vocational school where I learned graphic design.
Oh.
Um, and it was pretty cool. I enjoyed it. I did really well at it. I got
Mhm.
very good grades in it, whereas my regular high school grades, I was a terrible student. But I did very, very well at the graphic design. That's basically what like helped me graduate high school. Had I not been getting such high marks in that, it would have been tough to get out. So I just carried that over into college.
Yeah.
Um, it was fun. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot of very useful things, especially when it comes to marketing.
Mhm.
The problem was that I didn't really have an interest in it as a profession. And at the time, this was the early 2000s, so the industry was just rapidly changing with the internet, and the educational system had not caught up to that yet.
Mhm.
Like when I first started doing graphic design in high school, it was rulers and pencils.
Right.
We didn't have any computers. The second year of it, they introduced, they're like, oh, we're getting these new iMacs. And it was like the ones that you remember the TV commercials where it was like the big colored green
Yep.
one. And
I
so, you
remember
know what
the
I mean?
massive heavy cubes.
Yes. Um, and that those were the computers we had in all of our classrooms in college and stuff like that, was like the iMac 4 or whatever it was at the time. And web design was not even a thing. Like when I had to take typography classes where like I had to hand draw specific fonts
Okay.
and learn what the difference between this font and that font was, and where this one's appropriate and where that one's not, and everything else. So it's a lot of learning about humans and what's appealing to their eye
Right.
and what will basically sell a product. So like, it'd be stuff like this where like Skittles needs a new wrapper design.
Mhm.
I can do that. I can do that really well, and I can make a great wrapper for them for their new colored Skittles, and I can, I'll make it so people will buy it when they walk by it in the supermarket. Um, but that's what the degree was. And
Right.
then the minute I graduated school, that was out the window. That was obsolete. Every single job posting that was like needs a graphic designer, they didn't mean graphic designer, they meant web designer.
Mhm.
They want someone to build their new website. Um, and I didn't learn how to do that.
Right.
That we did half a semester on web design my last year of college, and that was it. And it was like, you probably, I mean,
You'll figure it
you
out.
you might need to learn this at some point. I don't know. And that was literally the only jobs you could get, was web design, as under the guise of graphic design. But luckily, I didn't have to bother with that, because right when I graduated college, I got a job in the music industry.
Nice.
So I was working at that music store, and I was approached by the owners of a drumstick company.
Okay.
And they said, we got a job opening. Do you want to come interview? And I did, and I got the job. And
Was it like sales for
No,
drumsticks
I
or?
was the artist relations manager for a drumstick
Oh,
company. So I was the guy that was in charge of the endorsement programs. So when Van Halen would run out of drumsticks on tour, they called me.
mhm.
Or if you were an up and coming drummer in some new band, or maybe a drummer who's existing, who's been around the block or something like that, and you wanted to switch brands of drumsticks, you had to go through me.
Okay.
Um, so, my degree, I walked off stage with a diploma that I think it's in my closet. And and that was that. And it was like literally the day after my commencement ceremony that I started this job. And it was a regular 9 to 5 office job. I had my own office. I had platinum records on all the walls and a Rolodex to every rock star known to man. And it was cool. And it got my foot into a lot of important doors, and I've made a lot of very, very good friendships out of it and connections, and people that I'm still friends with, like to this day. It was like I was their artist rep, 20 years ago, and now we're just buddies. Um, it was cool. I did that job for 3 years,
Mhm.
and that's when I was like, it kind of got too much, where I was like, I need to be the guy on the other end of the phone. I
Right.
need to be the guy who's panicking, in Italy right now because he ran out of drumsticks and he's only halfway through a tour. Like, I need to be that guy instead
Right.
of the guy that he's calling panicking, you know?
And what were you doing musically during this time, like during college, during those 3 years? What were you doing musically to like get yourself to the point where people want you as a touring musician?
So I was in high school. I had like my own rock band kind of thing, and we were a band for a few years. We put out one record, and then when that started to fizzle, like within the first year or so of college. People went off to different schools, and we just started to kind of, our musical interests started going in different directions, and me and a couple of the guys stayed together and formed a new band. And then I just started kind of putting myself out there as like, well, I had my band.
Mhm.
I had my band where I helped write the songs, and I was, one equal member and stuff like that. And kind of when that started to fall apart, it's like going through a breakup where um, you felt so close and so married to something, and then when it starts to not work out, it can be really heartbreaking. And my reaction to that always is like, well, I'm never letting that happen again, So that's where I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't just play in one band. Maybe I should play in all the bands. And it was like in high school that I sort of first discovered that sort of thing existed. Like, I think I always knew that there was session musicians and guys who were hired to come in and play other people's parts or something like that, but I didn't really understand what it was until I discovered who Josh Freese was.
Okay.
And I remember when the first A Perfect Circle record came out, and my friends and I, we were fans of Tool in high school, and we heard that the lead singer from Tool has a new side project, and he's putting out he's going to be in a second band. And first of all, for like a lead singer to have more than one band was like unheard of.
Right at that time it
And
was.
so, yeah, so we were all like, oh, well, I want to check out his other band now. And I just remember being so impressed with like Danny Carey from Tool as a drummer, being like, oh my God, this guy's incredible. And then I listened to Perfect Circle and I go, oh my God, this guy's incredible too. I was like, Maynard has like the world's best drummers on all of his stuff. How does he have always the best drummers in the world? And so I looked up the drummer from A Perfect Circle, and it was Josh Freese. And I said, I don't know who that is. So
Mhm.
then I researched him a little bit, and I went, oh my God, this guy's not in one great band. He's in every great band. His resume is literally everything I listen to on the radio.
Mhm.
And some of these bands have drummers. Like, what, you know what I mean? And that's when I was like, well, maybe you don't have to just be in one band. Maybe you can be in all of the bands. This guy certainly seems to be able to do it.
And nobody can break your heart ever again.
Right. And so I had some friends at the time that they were playing a show and they needed a drummer and they asked me to do it. And my band got really kind of, they weren't very cool with it because we were very all for one, one for all.
Right.
And now all of a sudden I was going and playing a show with another band. And, but it did make me feel like, oh, maybe this is kind of fun. I get to play this music tonight and that music tomorrow night, and it gives me a little variety. And so yeah, once my band started to fizzle out early in college, and we reformed a new band, then I kind of was like, well, I'm not going to be dedicated to just one. I'm going to play for a few, and I started getting some people asking me like, oh, do you want to join our band? Well, let's take a look at it. So while I'm working in the music store, and when I got that music industry job, I was still teaching the whole time. Having a 9 to 5 job meant I couldn't teach weekdays anymore, so I was just teaching weekends at that point. But then I was playing with like 2 different bands, and occasionally filling in for others, where someone needed a drummer for 1 show or 2 shows, or that's when I started going to studios more often too, where it's like, well, we're going to record this song and we don't have a drummer for it. And, so just in the local Western New York scene, I started, I still had my band that me and my buddies had kind of reformed out of the ashes of our old one. So that was still like my main group. But then like I started, playing with a few other ones in town, and just kind of started letting people know, like, if you need a drummer, call me. And it eventually got to a place where like that's all I was doing, where I'd quit the job at the drumstick company in order to play full time. Like that was the whole goal, is I'm leaving this job and I am going to just be behind a drum set, not a desk. And that gave me more available time to teach. So I started teaching weekdays again, and that quickly exploded into now I'm teaching 5 days a week all of a sudden again. And then playing with multiple bands and recording with multiple bands, just full time. And that's just all I did for a couple of years before I moved to California, because I felt like I hit a ceiling there, where, okay, everybody in town knows me. I've played with all of the top bands in town. I've played every major venue in town, including the hockey arena and including the baseball stadium. All right. There's literally nothing else to do here. Like, I've done it all. Yeah. I need to go to a bigger market where I can continue to do these things. So yeah, it was kind of just gradual over the years of like, well, I'll have my band, but I want to also play with those guys, and those guys need a drummer. And it's and that, started getting to a place too where I can tell people, well, no, I can play this show for you next week if you need a guy, but you have to pay me.
Okay, so this kind of life to me feels like it would be chaotic for a lot of people. Like, you have students, you have session gigs, you have live gigs, you're playing with many, many bands who have different styles of music, different songs, different things to learn. Yes. But clearly this appeals to you and you thrive in it. Or are you able to find personal time? Like, are you good at booking it, or is that non-existent in your world?
That's tough. That's a little bit harder. I've been trying to get much better about it. So for example, I don't teach on weekends anymore. So like Friday through Sunday, I don't do any lessons at all. Which that's the first time in my adult life. That's the first time since I was 18 that I like had a whole weekend off. Like, that's never happened before. And that's something new that I just started doing recently, of like, I'm not going to do weekend lessons Friday through Sunday. I'm not doing lessons anymore. Now, when I'm on the road, I'm on the road, so I can't help that I'm not here. But when I am here, now I know I have 3 days in a row just to have personal time. And
Do you know what to do with yourself when you have personal time? It sounds like you haven't had
Oh
any since you were a
yeah, no,
teenager.
no. Like I go out and
Okay.
um, I like going to antique malls, and I like
Okay.
I like going to tiki bars, and I like no. There's always some. That's the thing about Los Angeles. There's always something to do,
Yeah.
always. Um, so no, me and the girlfriend will go out to Disneyland, or we'll go to an antique mall, or go have breakfast somewhere. Or like no, I'm trying to get better about balancing the home life kind of thing, because it is difficult, and sometimes you are in a position where like, okay, you have to do this, and I know this is the day I had set aside to have a day off for myself, but now I got a deadline that came in. This guy needs this song recorded right away for something, or a show popped up and the band booked it, and it's like, oh well, now I'm booked. So it's not a perfect system. It's not a, it's never going to work out the way you want it to 100% of the time.
Mhm.
So you got to have some flexibility to roll with the punches on that too, and know that it's not always going to be the way you want it to be. And you are kind of at the mercy of other people a lot of the time, especially when you're just the side man and you're not the one in charge. If I was the one writing the songs and singing the songs and actually putting the music down on paper, I'd be the person that could say, I don't feel like playing a show this weekend.
Right.
Um, but I'm not in that position. It's somebody else doing that always. So now when they're like, I do want to play a show this weekend, now it's like, well, I either have to say yes or I don't have a job.
Do you have the time or interest in having your own, let's say, pet project where you are the person in control and you do get to make those decisions? Or is that just not the way you have your artistic life built?
Ah, yeah, I mean, sometimes it sounds like a nice idea,
Mhm.
uh, but it's not really kind of how I'm set up. It would be nice, but it's such an undertaking, and then you run into the same issue that I see my employers running into, where it's like now you have to rely on like two or three or four other people to
Right.
do what you want them to do. You
Mhm.
know, where it's like, no, I want the bass line to go like this. So I have to hire somebody that will do exactly what I want them to do. And I don't know if I really, I don't know if I have that creative bug in me. The internet didn't like that question.
The internet didn't
It
like the question. What can
yeah,
I do?
twice now it screwed it up.
That's awesome.
All right, so the question was, what should people be paying attention to? Um, at the moment, well, so the winter break, November, December kind of area, is actually, I'm going to be at home more, which is nice. So November's filled with dates with FleischKrieg, which we're doing like right now. It's like 2 shows a week, just fly dates. So we'll fly out someplace, play a couple shows, fly back, and we're doing that every weekend.
Mhm.
Um, and we're revisiting a lot of the areas that we've already played this year too, which is nice. So I think we're playing Reno for like the third time this year. We're playing um, a couple shows in Texas, and it'll be like, I think my fourth time there this year between them and Pretty Boy Floyd. Um, at same cities too, which is nice. So FleischKrieg's doing it the right way in
Mhm.
terms of touring. We went out on one big tour earlier this year, and then since then we've just been going out, every few weeks and hitting those same exact places that we just did the big tour on. So they're building a footprint in all these different markets by repeatedly hitting the same places. And I've been telling bands to do that for 20 years, and they're the first band that finally listened to me, because that's how you build an audience. Um, so December's kind of loose and at home. Now I have students, and I have work on the session schedule. So I always have that stuff going on, which is nice, but I won't be playing live much in December. I'll be able to be at home a little bit more, spend time here for the holidays. January is when things get picking up again.
Mhm.
Pretty Boy Floyd will be going back on the road. doing the Rock Island Festival in January in the Florida Keys, and then we're going on tour in Australia.
Oh, wow.
And then dates are starting to trickle in for 2023 right now. I know we have some stuff back overseas in Europe, and we have some stuff here in the States. So the easiest thing to do is just keep an eye on my schedule to see when and where I'm coming to town.
Mhm.
Uh, and I mean, those are the big things. I always have music being released constantly, but again, it's like session work stuff. So I usually just, once I'm done recording a project and
Right.
I have sent all of my files into the producer or the band or whoever's handling it, I just, my part's done. And then I just wait for them to be like, we're dropping this single that you played drums on, or our album's coming out next month that you played drums on, or something like that. So I just wait to hear that stuff.
Yeah.
And I'll always share it, and I'll always put the links to where people can buy that music on my website and stuff.
You do have a cool gallery of all the videos you've been in, which we haven't really talked about, but
Oh yeah.
I definitely encourage people to go to your website, and I'll put all the information below so they
Oh
can
cool.
find it. But yeah, to go and just check out all the cool videos you've been in. The Bisto Blanco is my favorite personally, but
That's a fun. That was a fun shoot to do. Actually, that was a lot of fun. They asked me to do a couple more after that, but I was unavailable. I was on the road, and I was
oh.
like, I'm not in town anymore. But it's cool, and I always like collaborating with them. I've done some stuff in the studio with them, and actually they've done some stuff in the studio with my other bands too. Like Calico came and sang on a song with the Rhythm Coffin.
Oh, cool.
So we did a version of the Monster Mash a couple of years ago, and she came and did guest vocals on it, which was great.
They're really cool, by the way. I did not know about them until I started doing research on you. And they're
Mhm.
super, super fun. I like the way you describe them. It's like what, Scooby-Doo and what?
Yeah, it's like the B-52s meets Scooby-Doo.
Yeah. It
Yeah,
truly
the
is.
Rhythm Coffin, I mean, they're just a local LA band, but they've been around for over a decade. They're like a staple in the LA haunt and horror community out here. And so when I'm available, when I'm at home, they'll play shows just locally, and oh my God, it's so much fun. We played a Halloween party last night, and it was wild. It was great because it's very audience participation also.
Okay.
So like we have a song called Gruesome's Cockroach Coffee, and they have two giant 6-foot inflatable cockroaches that get thrown into the audience and go crowd surfing. And there's a song called The Headless Head Bop, and like we have just bags and bags and bags of styrofoam heads that go out into the audience, and it looks like popcorn going off, and like it's cool, and it's just a lot of fun.
Mhm.
It's pure fun from start to end the whole time we're on stage, and everything's like it's like family friendly too. We could play a 10-year-old's backyard birthday party just as easily as play a show with Alice Cooper. Like
Right.
it's it's age appropriate for everything. Everything's fun, singing about werewolves and zombies and vampires, and just yeah, it's cool. um so, and they're always producing new music constantly and stuff like that. We put new music out every year, whether it's like one or two songs or a whole record or something like that.
Mhm.
We're always producing music. We've got a couple of fun music videos out too. One of them I actually directed.
Oh, very good.
We put a music video out last year called Ballad Stein, and it's like a love ballad, but from the point of view of like Frankenstein's monster. And so we did kind of a spoof on, we kind of mashed up, a Mel Brooks version of The Bride of Frankenstein.
Fun.
So, uh, and that was the whole music video we did for it. And we, shot it all in black and white and everything too, which was cool. And I was like, as soon as we kind of came up with the idea, I was like, I want to direct this. So I got to direct a music video too, which was
Cool.
really
Very, very cool.
uh,
So
yeah.
I encourage everybody to go to the website. And like I said, I'll have it below.
Okay.
You're very good about updating your tour dates, which I really appreciate because not all
Yes.
bands and musicians do that. So we can
Right.
definitely easily find you, see which band you're on tour with and where. Great gallery and other information about you, as well as like really
Hmm.
cool merch and that. And then my last question for you is, and you can take this question however you want in terms of advice, whether it's like advice for musicians, drummers, or like drum students. But you do have a lot of students and you have a lot of experience in this field. Do you have any advice that you think would be useful for somebody to know, or that you wish you had known sooner, that you would share with the audience?
Hold yourself accountable and don't ever slack off. You want to always be prepared because you never know when opportunity might knock. And if you are not ready for that opportunity, you might not get another one. And so if playing professionally is your goal, if that's what you've set out in life to do, is to become a professional in any field, not just music, but in any field, if that's what you're doing, then you have to treat it like an ongoing practice, and not, well, I learned this and I'm done with that. It's, no, you learn this, now keep it sharp, practice it, keep it in your toolbox, like always take it out and sharpen it as frequently as possible. So because things are going to come randomly at you. All of the best gigs that I've ever had and all the best jobs I ever have, none of them really came from like a cold audition.
Mm-hmm.
It was always someone recommending me. It was always somebody thought of me and said, who would be good for this job? Call my buddy Nick. And if I was not ready to go and ready and prepared at all times, then I would not be able to do a lot of those jobs. Or I'd have to pass them off to other people, or I just would go in and not be prepared enough. So, be your own worst critic, be disciplined about it though. Like, be honest with yourself about what you can and can't do, and the things you can't do, work on getting them into the other category. Work on getting them into the category of things you can do. There was plenty of gigs I've had to turn down over the years because it was a style of playing that I wasn't as proficient at as I am other things. And so I noticed, I was like, well, I'm getting a lot of these phone calls for this kind of thing. And if that's not my thing, well, if I want to do those jobs, like maybe it should be my thing. So I better work at it, and now I can say yes to those phone calls. Because I was turning down jobs that I wanted to do. I was turning down gigs that I was like, oh my God, I would love to do this, but I just know I lack in this one area that's required for that gig. So took some time and worked on being able to do those things. So yeah, stay sharp, stay disciplined, and be very, very honest with yourself and real about what you can and can't do, and always try to expand that.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with me today. I really enjoyed learning about you and your career.
Thank
And
you.
like I said to everybody, definitely check out his website and like all the cool stuff. There's just so much on there that you've done over the past few years and that you have coming up. But thank you again for being here.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of MetalNet TV, Conversations with Nicholas Mason. Make sure you give him a follow if you're not already following him, and check him out when he's on the road. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to this channel and following me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I will be back with another episode of Conversations and some other great content for you coming up in the coming weeks. Take care and much respect.